The Scythe snail is no snail, and the ThermalRight B12 looks a lot like the Gentle Typhoon. Let's check out how well they perform in my standardized fan testing. And welcome to Computer Tech and More. Before we get into testing, I would like to take this opportunity to remind you to subscribe to my channel and to check out my Patreon page. It's viewers like you that help make this channel possible. So thank you very much for checking them out. Alright, let's get straight into the testing. Before we get to those graphs, I want to show off my raw data. So here's the TL-B12 right there. And right below it is the Scythe WonderSnale. If you want to use this data, you may go ahead and use it. However, I do ask that you give me credit because I'm the one who did collect all of the data. All right, let's jump to the graphs. The first graph here is airspeed performance vertical versus distance from the fan horizontal. And this is taken at key points to be representative of a small form factor, a compact, a mid-tower, and a full tower case. The full tower being a lot like the Torrent, the mid-tower being a lot like a Meshify 2, I think they're called, S2, and I forget what the 9 and the 6-inch, but anyways, what we're looking for is as close to horizontal as possible and as linear as possible. And we can see that the B12 performs very linearly, but has a pretty steep drop-off in terms of its airspeed performance. That means that it tends to spread out the airflow pretty significantly, so it doesn't create that nice focused airflow that we really want to see in a good case fan. As we jump to taking a look at the WonderSnale, it is very different. Its peak performance isn't quite on the same level as the B12. However, the lines are much more perpendicular, meaning it doesn't lose much airspeed over the distance, which means it is an excellent fan for case airflow applications. Or it has the potential to be a good fan for that case airflow application. But let's jump into the next graphs to take a closer look at things. This graph is RPM versus airspeed through an Aircooler. So what we're looking for is a fan to be performing over here. So this would be maximum airspeed for the minimum number of RPM. It's just a efficiency at how good the fan is at pushing air through. This blue dots represents my control fan, which is somewhere in between an A12X25 and a Noctua A14. So what we can see clearly from the WonderSnale and the B12 is they're both very good performers in terms of their blade efficiency at pushing air through a cooler. I just knocked my camera. The WonderSnale in particular appears to have a higher top end than the B12. So it may do a little bit better in that application. This next one is RPM versus CFM. So this is how much air it can push, that's CFM, so a volume of air, versus its RPM, again, efficiency. The WonderSnale performed really badly on this, and I think part of it had to do when I put my anemometer at the back of the apparatus, I noticed that I heard a pitch difference in the fan's RPM. I think that it was creating so much back pressure for the fan because it was trying to push so much through it that it was actually slowing it down. I haven't noticed this from any other fan that I've tested so far. So I'm not sure exactly what that means for the WonderSnale because I just don't have the equipment. And again, I want to reiterate, I'm funding this all myself. If you would like to see me improve the testing and get more accurate testing in this sort of testing methodology, meaning you like my fan tests, I implore you to take a look at my Patreon, and I really appreciate any, donation that you're willing to give me. But going back onto the data, we see that the B12 tends to follow my average fan very, very closely. Now we're taking a look at noise versus CFM. So this is the noise efficiency of the fan. Again, top performers would be over in this area. The bottom performers would be over here. So horizontal is noise, vertical is CFM. And the WonderSnale is basically absolutely terrible. The B12 is also below average on this graph, actually pretty significantly below average based on these lines. But we'll get into more detail as to a better comparison in later graphs. Let's jump to the next graph. This next one is noise versus RPM. This is, again, an efficiency graph. So how much noise does it generate for an RPM of the fan? And the WonderSnale is one of the top performers in this category. Well, maybe not top performance, but it outperforms my control fan. The TL-B12, on the other hand, underperforms. It produces more noise for a given RPM of fan. Bringing us to noise normalized distance from the fan versus airspeed. The control is the green line, the WonderSnale is this blue line, and the B12 is the red line. And we can pretty much clearly see, the horizontal axis is distance, the vertical is airspeed, and we can clearly see that the WonderSnale appears to be a really good fan, especially noise normalized, which is what we're looking at here, in that airspeed from distance from the fan. So this looks like it can maintain that airspeed through your case to get it to your coolers, which should improve efficiency. At 100% PWM, things are shaken up a little bit. My control fan is right here. And the B12 starts off really strong. It moves a lot of air. But then it has a very, very steep drop off, losing performance pretty significantly. At about the 9 to 11 inch mark, it basically matches performance of my control fan and then completely loses at the end. So I wouldn't recommend this for a big case, but for small and medium size, it appears to do okay. The WonderSnale, on the other hand, looks absolutely fantastic for a 120 millimeter size fan and significantly outperforms my control fan at this 100% PWM mark. And it maintains its performance across all distances really well. But let's see how these compare to all the other fans I've taken a look at. This is 120 millimeter noise normalized airspeed through in my Aircooler performance. And right here at the top, so my noise normalized is my reading of 40 decibels. The WonderSnale achieved 1.3 meters per second of air, which is good for just over 190 watts of cooling on my particular Aircooler. I want to reiterate that a bunch. Your particular Aircooler may not match up to mine in terms of its heat dissipation capability at a given airflow speed. But if your fan is, let's say, only able to produce 0.7 meters per second of air, and you upgrade it to one that can do 1.3, you should see an improvement in how much wattage your CPU can achieve, or CPU running at a lower temperature if you have it more locked down. Back to the graph, significantly, the WonderSnale outperforms the A12X25. As for the B12, it sits a little below average, well, maybe at average, at 1 meter per second of airflow, which is good for maybe 160-ish watts of cooling. See my specific Aircooler testing video for what each airspeed, wattage, clock speed relates to my particular CPU, the 11700K. Moving things up to 100% PWM for the fans, so their maximum airspeed, we have the WonderSnale at 2.2 meters per second of airflow, which is good for maybe 230-ish watts. It's right about there. So that is a very good result. The A12X25 achieved 1.9 meters per second of airflow. So that is a very good result for the WonderSnale. The B12 achieved the exact same within airflow of the A12X25 for approximately the same RPM, but the B12 was 55 decibels, the A12X25 was 49.5 decibels, and the WonderSnale was 50 decibels. Again, my error in noise is around 5 decibels of noise. I get it as tight as I can, but realistically, I'm looking at that 5 decibel reading, and the airflow difference is less than, or is 0.1 meters per second. So if a value is within that category, they are functionally equivalent. So the B12 tends to be noisier, as per my readings, but is pretty close to that error mark. But the airspeed is the exact same. The WonderSnale is noisier, but not significantly so. And so it's within error, but its performance characteristics is outside the error, so it is a more efficient fan. Now we're taking a look at noise normalized distance from a fan versus airspeed. So this just has a whole bunch of different fans. So some of my bottom performers here are like the NFP12, which is a great pressure optimized fan, but not so good in airflow testing. And the NFS12B towards the top. We have the Tough Fan 12, the Silent Wings 4 Pro. Now let's get into our fans for this testing. Okay, I just highlighted the WonderSnale, and in this noise normalized test, it is at the top of the charts. It doesn't produce the maximum airflow at my minimum 6-inch mark, but it holds a very flat line and has almost no airspeed drop across all distances. But it would say functionally very similar, equivalent to the Tough Fan 12 and the Silent Wings for 120, but it actually drops, that one drops off pretty significantly towards that 14.5-inch mark. As for the B12, I just highlighted it. It starts off pretty strongly and then drops off to mediocrity. It is basically average in this type of test. All right, let's jump to 100% PWM. And this is 100% PWM. So here's the P12, this is the S12B. At the top here, we have the Silent Wings 4 Pro 120. And I've highlighted the WonderSnale right here. It starts off basically middle of the pack, and then it just sort of catches up to everything. So it doesn't produce the most airflow right at that 6-inch mark. Again, this is 100% PWM. So over here you have the RPM and the noise is the second value. So the fan name, the RPM, noise. But it just sort of catches up at the end, becoming one of the top performers in the 120 millimeter class. As for the B12, well, it's somewhere here in the middle. It is basically an average performer in every single way. So let's just move on to the next graph. All right, this is a simplified view. This takes a single point out of that other graph, so the 9-inch mark. And this is noise normalized for 120 millimeter size fans, and the WonderSnale was able to achieve 1.6 meters per second of airflow, being towards the top of the graph. There's the A12X25, largely considered to be the best all-around fan currently on the market. We have the Silent Wings 4 Pro right there, and the B12 is right here at 1.4 meters per second of air. With other fans that I've tested listed throughout this graph. We do have some 140 millimeter size fans in here just as a reference point for differences for how a bigger fan performs as compared to these 120 millimeter size fans. Ramping things up to 100% PWM, we have WonderSnale sitting right here at a noise of 50 decibels and moving 2.5 meters per second of airflow. The A12X25 moved 2.2 meters per second of airflow. Add a little bit less noise, but basically in my margin of error. As for the B12, it is right here, this orange line, and its noise level is 55 decibels, and it moved 2.3 meters per second of airflow. So functionally equivalent to the A12X25 at significantly more noise. but they are not top performers. So 3000 RPM fans really are at the top of the graphs here because they spin so much faster and push so much more air. But if we're looking at pretty ordinary average fans, the WonderSnale is the top performer here. Taking a look at CFM in particular, this is noise normalized. The B12 is sitting right here, spinning at 871 RPM, moving 33.4 cubic feet per minute of air. The WonderSnale is sitting towards the bottom of the graph, and I think I've already addressed why I think it's sitting back here. It's spinning at 1,385 RPM, so that's significantly faster spinning speed, and a reading of 27 cubic feet per minute of air. The A12X25 is sitting here right towards the top at 43.6 cubic feet per minute of air, spinning at 1,233 RPM. Let's go to 100% PWM. At that 100% PWM, the faster RPM fans, of course, are going to be towards the top here. But right here is the B12 spinning at 1,980 RPM, 55 decibels, 70 cubic feet per minute of airflow. The A12X25 outperforms it at 74 CFM, and of course we've already gone over the noise levels. The WonderSnale, on the other hand, is sitting right here at the bottom, 39 cubic feet per minute of air, 2,270 RPM. ThermalRight TL-B12 noise test. RPM. Scythe, WonderSnale, 100% RPM. Continuing with our trend talking about noise, we have CFM versus decibels. The P12 is among the worst in this category. The WonderSnale is sitting right here, this blue line towards the bottom of the fans. The B12 is sitting here pretty much in the middle of the pack between the top performers and the bottom performers, with some of the top performers being the Silent Wings 4 Pro 120, this blue one being the T30, and all right, let's jump to the next graph. We're taking a look at 120 millimeter class fans, Airspeed versus decibels through an Aircooler. So top performers are again over in this section of the graph. So we have the Silent Wings 4 Pro 120 at this top area, and at the bottom we have, what's this order? The P12 from Arctic, and the NFF12 3000 also sitting at the bottom of this graph. I have highlighted the WonderSnale. It is a top performing fan. It doesn't have the same sort of raw top performance, but for most of its given air speeds, it does not produce very much noise in particular. It just doesn't have the same sort of top end as several other fans. As for the B12, it once again is basically sitting in the middle of the pack. It isn't a top performer, it isn't a bottom performer, it's just sort of middle. Case Airspeed at the 6-inch mark versus a decibel reading. So decibel again is the horizontal, the Airspeed is the vertical. And some of our top performers here are the Silent Wings 4 Pro, some of the bottom performers are the NFS12B and the P12 from Arctic. So where is the WonderSnale? Right there. This blue line right next to it is the A12X25. So the WonderSnale is very good at case airflow, particularly at the 6-inch mark. As for the B12, it finally shows good performance. But again, this is that 6-inch close mark where it has proven to be a top performer based on the other graphs. So it's still off the path of our top performers, but you can see that it's shifted to be better than the middle of the road. Now that the testing's out of the way, I'd like to take this opportunity to do a sort of open box experience so that we can do a little bit of a fan analysis to take a look at the details on the fan structure as well as on the box. First, let's take a look at the TL-B12. So this was made by ThermalRight, and they're a little bit less expensive brand. So I can't attest for overall quality. I can only determine how they perform as a straight out of the box. So I chose this one because it looked a lot like the Gentle Typhoon, as well as a similar blade sweep angle to the Noctua A12X25, sort of the gold standard of fans right now. So on the box, some specifications: its weight, rotational speed at 2,150, which, is a pretty good RPM. It's about the same as the A12X25. Noise is rated at 28.1, airflow at 69 CFM, static pressure at 2.87, that's pretty good value, and 0.16 amps. That's a little bit on the higher side. Not extreme, but a little bit. 12 volts, and SFD bearing version 2, a 6-year warranty. That's actually pretty good. All right, let's take a look. So first up, it's got these nice little rubber pads in the corner, and these are Noctuas. And let's just do a quick compatibility check. Well, they're not a perfect fit. They're a little bit loose, but I imagine if you're clamping this to a radiator or something, you could use Noctua's gasket on this fan and it would do just fine. Just fine. Let's go ahead and put that back on. Inside the box, the B12 also features these hard mount screws for radiators. I'm not sure what these are. It's got a Y splitter for your PWM, as well as standard screws for your PC case. And as I mentioned before, it's got a very similar angle and sort of hub size. I need a pair of calipers. They're about the same size. So that's actually been a trend with a lot of newer fans, is these larger hubs to fit more poles in there, so that it greatly improves the efficiency and amount of power for these fans. In terms of the front inlet design, basically nothing to speak of. It's basically just flat, which actually could be pretty good for a radiator. The blades do sit pretty close to the front here. I'm not sure if that's going to cause any turbulence if it's in a pull configuration, as that could create a pretty awful sound if it does. I did not perform that test in my testing. I might have to add that in. I'll have to think about that. In terms of the back, it uses 3 struts. Most other fans use 4 or more. So, well, the struts, these supports, I'm calling them struts, are thicker, but they've got a little bit of an angled feature on the back. So sharpen the tip, and then they angle basically in that direction, with this side being flat. So that'll help direct the airflow, and it also helps with like noise as the sweep of the fans runs past these poles. It makes noise. So having a feature on there does help reduce the amount of noise on there. Otherwise, it's got a little bit of an outlet design. Actually pretty minor overall. The inside of the blades are thicker. Kind of similar to the Noctuas. And that's just how they connect into the motor. They do kind of sweep out, so sort of a little bit of a cup shape in there to grab onto the air. In terms of how close they are to the edge, pretty close, but not not near the same level as Noctua. But I think that's everything we can talk about on this. Because of the square box design, it would fit over a radiator pretty well for getting a nice pressure seal for use in radiators or even heat sinks. All right, let's move on to the next fan. So this one is called the WonderSnale. It is made by Scythe, and they've been around a long time making fans. And this one came about because I was looking at fans that were, again, similar to the A12X25 in terms of features. Oh, inside the WonderSnale's packaging, it featured these rubber grommets for installing in the case and a fan extender. Nothing else. And before I forget, this is really funny. So the A12X25 spins counterclockwise. The Scythe, WonderSnale, spins clockwise. So I love counter-rotating fans. You could stack your fans, one spinning one way, one spinning the other. Just a personal joke dream of mine. But when I purchased this fan, I didn't realize it was a quote-unquote counter-rotating fan. It's just kind of cool. There aren't a lot of fans that spin in the opposite direction out there. So it's kind of a cool feature about this fan. Let's do a little walk over the box. It's got some Chinese characters. It's got shock absorbers on it. I cannot read most of what's on the front. All right, let's go ahead and go to the back. 25mm frame without anti-vibration pads. Bearing structure is a fluid dynamic bearing. High quality lubricant. Good to, wow, 250 degrees C. Vibration and shock absorbing. That's the cable length. All right. Then down here on the bottom, I guess it has a couple different models. Which one do I have? There we go. I had the bottom one. 2,400 RPM is the maximum. 300 plus or minus 200, 2,400 RPM, plus or minus 10%. CFM reading is, I guess that must be the minimum. 7.68, is it out of focus? Maximum is 77.23. Static pressure is rated at 3.59 millimeters of H2O. 35 point, oh, pascals. There we are. Decibel rating is 3 to 29.3. Amperage is 0.15. And its hours at 120,000. That's a pretty long lifespan on it. But they're definitely catering to a lot of different markets on this fan because it has a lot of languages just on it in the first place. But it makes it a little bit more confusing to read. All right, let's take a look at the fan now. All right, this fan has removable pads. They are not compatible with Noctua's at all. They use their own design. Just for those of you who might have been hoping to use the gasket or whatever. There we go. It is a very squared off design, so it should be good on a radiator, whether it's push or pull. The sweep angle is very similar to a Noctua, so it's this hybrid style. So more thinner blades, and they're fairly steep angle, actually, much steeper than Noctua's. And what was this called? The B12. So these are even steeper. So that's interesting because it's pressure. So now here on the back, it's got these 4 poles to support the center. Actually, compared to a lot of newer fans, this is a very small fan hub. The 4 poles, flat on this side, a little bit of angle on that side, ends in a little bit of a sharp point there. Looking at the back of the blades, the main thing we note is how steep they appear to be. The blades themselves just look pretty steep. They don't have any cup shape to them at all. They're just a smooth blade with that steep angle, and that's why they perform pretty well. It had a pretty pleasant sound to it. All right, let's wrap it up and jump to the conclusion. Here, I'm going to be doing the graphs in pairs, and this is our value proposition. The first one is the 6-inch airspeed per dollar noise normalized on the left and 100% PWM on the right. The WonderSnale is sitting right here. It is a pretty good, better than average performance per dollar. It isn't a top performer, but if you want something that's a little bit better, like top performance, and you got a little bit more money to spend, it may be a good value. But if you're on a stricter budget, there are other fans to consider. As for the B12, it is ranked a bit lower than the WonderSnale. When we're taking a look at 100% PWM, so this right graph, the WonderSnale is kind of dropped back quite a bit, but is still pretty close to average. The B12, on the other hand, jumps up in terms of its value. But again, this goes on whether you want to run your fan at 100% PWM, where it would be pretty noisy. So realistically, I think that we should all be looking at this noise normalized graph more. Let's jump to that 9-inch mark. Same sort of graphs, same sort of thing, except we're taking a look at the case airflow at 9 inches. We can see many fans kind of jumping up to be more of this lumped together. So we have the WonderSnale, the B12, the C12, Pro C12, with the G12 being particularly high, the Arctic P12, the Arctic F12. So the WonderSnale tend to do a little bit better in noise than the P12 at the high end, but they're functionally equivalent here. I realize I haven't mentioned price. The WonderSnale was rated at $17 when I filmed this video, while the B12 had a price of $16. So kind of an average fan price these days, considering that there are more $30 fans than there were like 10 years ago. So in that value, it's pretty good. When we're looking at 100% PWM curve, the WonderSnale and B12 drop pretty far back. They don't have that same sort of top-end performance as many other fans, but I guess they still technically above average, taking a look at this sort of average-ish line. So you really can't go wrong, but in terms of that raw value, the P12 is a better choice, and then the G12 is still our top performer here. But really the WonderSnale and B12 are still good value here. Taking a look at raw CFM, so this is just the amount of volume of air that these fans can push, not looking at it in a case, just raw volume of air as opposed to airspeed. The WonderSnale doesn't do particularly well here because it didn't push that much high volume of air, which is really weird because it was so good in that case airflow test. So again, I think there's something else going on. So this isn't a good test for the WonderSnale in particular. The B12, on the other hand, performed really quite well compared to other fans at that 100% PWM mark. Again, the WonderSnale really is not looking that great, but I think for these fans in this test, we can ignore these tests. But if you care about it, the B12 ranked pretty well overall. And lastly, we have performance per dollar, noise normalized 100% through an Aircooler. How does the value proposition work out here? Well, for the WonderSnale, it is flippin' fantastic. It is among the best in terms of value in this category. Matter of fact, the only one better is the significantly cheaper G12, but it doesn't have the same sort of raw performance that the WonderSnale has. If you're looking for a less expensive fan to put on your Aircooler, I highly recommend the WonderSnale. But again, I want to remind you, looking at this graph, this is performance per dollar, not raw performance. So just because bigger is better, meaning a longer line on this graph is better, doesn't mean that it's better true performance. This is a performance per dollar. So if you're on a budget, you would take this into consideration. But we already looked at the raw performance graphs. Jump back to it if you want to review it. But taking a look at the WonderSnale is fantastic. The B12 just isn't quite as good, but it's still above average for a noise normalized circumstance. The NF-P12 from Noctua performs very close in performance, but is not quite as good value. The Arctic P12 is, again, not quite the same value as the WonderSnale. Going to 100% PWM, we can see that the WonderSnale kind of dropped back here a bit. It doesn't have that same peak performance as some of the other ones in this value proposition. The C12, the G12s, they kind of overtake it. The P12 from Arctic overtakes it pretty significantly at this 100% mark. But it's still not bad. It's still well above average. And we can see the NF A12X25 sitting down here. Not a particularly good value overall, despite its excellent performance, where the WonderSnale actually outperformed it in my testing at 100% PWM. So that's why it has that value mark associated with it. Well, let's jump to the conclusion. I apologize for the change in audio quality. I had to do some emergency charging on my video recording device. The TL-B12 in noise normalized testing was around my control fan's value, which is based off of the A12X25. So it's a good fan. It's not an excellent fan, but it's a good fan. At 100% PWM, it outperforms the A12X25. So it is a very good fan. In terms of its value, it is also quite an excellent value. But again, with all of it, I cannot attest for how long it will last. We all know about the cases of Noctuas running for pretty much forever. So take everything with a grain of salt. But in terms of out of the box, it is a great choice. As for the wonderful WonderSnale by Scythe, it too, in noise normalized testing, was very good, but not great. Nothing overly special. At 100% PWM, it was noisier than a lot of other fans, but still was a very good performer. And its value proposition was overall kind of middle of the pack. It was good, but not great. Pretty much in the middle. So where does that leave us? Either of these two fans would be a pretty good choice to put in your computer case. Both are well-known brands. Both have been around for a long time. They both performed well in testing and were at a pretty good price. So what it comes down to is which kind of styling do you prefer in this case, or does the slightly better value of the B12 here take you as the winner? If it was me, I personally would still stick to a Noctua, specifically the A12X25, but that's me. But I guess that wraps up my conclusion. Two excellent fans to take a look at. Thank you very much for watching. Have a great day. Subscribe for more content, and please check out my Patreon page and think about supporting me to help me acquire better testing equipment. And that's it.